Folks, I'm in the studio and I am absolutely delighted. My friend and guest, Russ Breault, is here. And thank you, first of all, for coming on Politics, Prophecy, and Supernatural.
Hey, well, it's my pleasure to be here.
Well, it's an absolute honor. Just so you know, I've been a student of the Shroud of Turin basically for 40 years. We covered it in our Watchers series,
yep.
and Russ was gracious enough to put us in touch with Dame Isabel Pixek, who, we could spend an hour just on that alone. But I want to get into this and Russ also gave us all these different slides, which we'll put up on the screen, and also in post we'll be putting them so you can really examine them. So give us some backstory on this artifact and why it's just not some medieval forgery. What are we looking at in the first slide?
Well, this is the full shroud. So in other words, it's 14 feet long, 3.5 feet wide. So it's a very long, narrow cloth. And it's been in Turin, Italy, hence the name Shroud of Turin, and it's been there for over 400 years, and wow. And there is a double image on there. Now the thing you see most, the thing you notice most, are those series of burns and patches from a fire in 1532. So the image lies between those two parallel lines, and we're really not concerned about the burns and the patches, but the image that lies in between them. So probably the next image would be good. So now we're just looking at half of the shroud, and we turn the image vertical, and there you clearly see the image of a man there with long hair, and you see in the face, and you see the arms and blood on the arms. You see a nail wound in the wrist. You see the legs. You see some blood down by the feet, and then now adjacent to the patch on the right up by the chest is also a side wound with blood flowing down from it. And then the shroud, because the shroud was in a fire, it was doused with water, so you have a pattern of water stains, and there's a big water stain over the knees, and there's more water stains along the side, and you can see them. But just so people know everything that they're looking at, and so here this is the inexplicable image of about a 5'10", apparently crucified man. And what most people don't realize about the shroud, first of all, about half the people think it's just a face image, and they don't realize it's a full image. But if you go to the next slide, this was discovered in 1898, and the shroud has this incredible property of showing up so much better in a photographic negative. And so for centuries, no one ever saw this image. All they ever saw was the natural image, which you saw earlier.
And this was taken by Secondo Pio.
Secondo Pio was the first one to actually photograph the shroud, and he was shocked by it. I mean, it's and then if you go to the next slide, which is that's just another another version of it. So now you have the natural image, just the face, the natural image on your right, and the photo negative image on your left, and you see how much more lifelike and it is on the left. So the only explanation that we've been able to figure out is that the image that's on the cloth itself must be a negative image. Therefore, what shows up in a photo negative is actually a positive image. And so the either or proposition with the shroud has to be kept in focus, and that's this: if it's not authentic, then what is it? If it's not authentic, then it must be the work of an artist. If that's the case, then there must be some trace of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, stain, some kind of substances on the cloth, used by some alleged artist to craft this image. You have a whole pattern of blood stains. Is the blood just paint? Is it animal blood? Or is it human blood? Is it blood from actual wounds? And so we come away now, and we'll show you in just a minute, and we'll get into a little bit of that in just a second. Let's go to the next slide and see what that is.
Before you do that, I want to. There's a story. I don't know whether it's true or not. Tell me if it is. You would probably know more than I. But so Secondo Pio is the first man in history to photograph the shroud. Mm-hmm. So he starts apparently, allegedly, from what I've heard, with what you see on the right.
Right.
And he's in the dark room. And he's, getting the chemicals on the glass plate, because that's what it was. And all of a sudden, the image on the left shows up and he almost drops the plates. Is that, what do you know about that?
Yes, he almost fell out the window of his apartment because he was so stunned. He felt like he was seeing the face of God because he was the first one to ever see that image.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I before we move this is so important. I mean, this lay hidden like so many things literally for almost 2,000 years. And then, so if a forger is doing this, they would have to know about photography, and they wouldn't in the 15th century, so it becomes incredibly mysterious.
Yeah, when of course photography wasn't invented until 1830, right. So it becomes rather a moot issue that it would be a photograph. I'll bring this up now. When you look at the face image, and Old Testament, we look at the Old Testament blessing that Aaron, Moses, his brother, was told to, how he was told to bless the children of Israel. He says this is from Numbers 6. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. Lord, so let me repeat that. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. So this little 2-verse blessing mentions the face of God twice. In the blessing that God's face would shine on you and that God's face would turn towards you. Wow. Yet the irony is that Old Testament, no one ever saw the face of God, not even Moses. And so fast forward to the New Testament, everyone sees Jesus. In fact, Paul, he describes him as the image of the invisible God,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
And so now we look at 2 Corinthians 4:6. The knowledge of God's glory is displayed where? In the face of Christ. So God's glory is displayed in the face of Jesus. And I just wonder, I look at this iconic face image here. I have this little prop. Is it possible that God has preserved that for all generations?
God's calling card.
God's calling card, yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Next slide.
Sure. Now this
blew me away when I saw this on live TV when it aired for the first time back in what, the 80s?
Yeah,
early 90s?
Probably from 1977.
Wow. Okay.
And using a computer that they had on loan, I think, to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Yeah.
And it's called a VP8 image analyzer, and it's just what it does is just assigns elevation based on lights and darks. And so the darker the image, the higher the elevation, the lighter the image, the lower the elevation. So it turns into a topographical map. And what they discovered using the VP8 is that the shroud contains distance information. In other words, this is not a quality that any painting has, nor is it a quality that any standard photograph would have. So in other words, what the scientists would say, work on, is it indicated that this cloth wrapped a three-dimensional human form when this image was created, or when this image was formed. And so this discovery of the VP8, a whole team of scientists, I have some images in a minute, but a whole team of scientists went to Turijn in the late 70s, and it was this discovery that was the genesis of that whole scientific effort, because the scientists, the physicists, and the chemists, and everyone was saying, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And so they went over there not to prove the shroud one way or the other, but just to find out the nature of the image.
So what am I looking at here?
So this is the scientists that were working on it. This is, again, in 1978, a team of nearly 40 American scientists went to Turijn, and they had 5 days working in shifts, round the clock, hands-on, 120 hours, and they brought with them all kinds of gear, about 70 crates of gear weighing about 10 tons. And,
that's unbelievable.
And this is just the first glimpse underneath the shroud in hundreds of years. And so go ahead to the next slide. No, this is called photomicroscopy, where nearly every inch of the shroud was photographed at different levels of magnification.
Unbelievable.
And they took over 30,000 photographs when they were there, and that's when you use film.
Right.
And so then the next slide is that this is chemist Ray Rogers, an iconic image.
He's passed away now, right?
Yeah, he has passed away. He's right down there with a magnifying glass and saying, "Where's the paint?"
Wow.
You know, and so
because there isn't any paint.
There isn't any. There's no visible trace of any kind of paint, ink, dye, pigmentation, or stain. There's no substances on the cloth to account for the image. The reason the image shows up is, chemically speaking, something has caused the accelerated dehydration and oxidation of the cellulose fibers composing the linen, but only in those areas immediately surrounding a body. So the image is literally a discoloration of the cloth with something having caused this accelerated dehydration and oxidation. So it's not because of any substances applied to the cloth.
Would this be too early to bring in Dame Isabel Picsek's work, or is this a good point to talk about that? Or
oh, sure.
Okay.
Isabel Picek was a world-class artist and also a physicist. You know, all in the same body.
Right.
And it's
incredible.
But she had a belief based on looking at it from an artist's perspective as well as a physicist that this body was actually hovering, actually elevated,
levitating
right, at the time in which the image was formed, and there is a plane where I don't have an image of it, but there is a plane where if you go through, you see part of the body under the plane, part of the body over the plane, and so it's an astonishing theory, and it just remains, I think. Calling it an event horizon is absolutely, shroud or no shroud, absolutely what the resurrection was. I mean, we talk about the Big Bang, you know, for the creation of the physical universe, if you believe in the Big Bang. You know, cosmologists call that a singularity, right? But there was an equivalent singularity that occurred in the tomb. And it was a singularity that changed the entire spiritual world. And and the question is, did a 14-foot-long linen cloth capture that event for all generations? And
we think it did.
I think it did.
I'm going to break just for a second, folks. If you're interested in this, we have an interview with Dame Isabel Picek along with Barry Schwartz. It's in Best of Watchers. The entire our expose into the Shroud of Turin, and you can check that out just by going to the site lamarzulli.net. Shameless plug, but in fact, what I might do is I might try to download that and put it in with this and have a special, because you guys need to see this, and we're just gonna. In fact, Merry Christmas. That's what we'll do. So let's continue.
Okay.
Next slide.
Sure. Now, let's just look at some photomicroscopy. Remember I told you that they took all those photographs using microscopy. So now you're looking at a close-up of a burned area. So no problem seeing the threads that are burned and the threads that are right adjacent to the charred threads that are intact, and they weren't burned, okay? So no problem seeing that. Now go to the next slide. Now this is rust left from an old tack. If you can believe it, somewhere at some point, someone hung the shroud up using a tack, if you can believe it. And,
what's the magnification on this, by the way?
This is probably about 40 times.
Okay.
And so, clearly, you can see the rust clinging to the threads and the fibers. No problem seeing that at all, right? So now we go to the next slide. This is a blood image area from the lower back. No problem seeing the blood soaking through and clinging to all the threads and the fibers. Now the next slide is an image area from the eyes. You can't hardly tell that anything's there.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you have to drill down hundreds of times magnification to begin to see the effect of this accelerated dehydration and oxidation. If there was paint on the cloth, dye, ink, stain, anything, you would see it as plain as day, but you don't. And
That's
so,
just astounding.
and so this
Absolutely
just
astounding.
validates that this is not the work of an artist. Now, so the question now is, what is the shroud? And, one of the scientists way back called it a love letter left behind for the analytical mind. There are 4 words commonly used to describe what the shroud is. It's called an artifact. It's called a relic. It's called a mystery. It's called a symbol. All those words are fine. They really don't tell you very much. So I got to thinking, there has to be another concept. So I looked at all the words that are used in the New Testament to describe what Jesus accomplished for us on the cross. And there are 4 of them. We have been bought, purchased, redeemed, ransomed. What are those words? Those are all words of transaction. A transaction has occurred. A payment has been made on our behalf. So I got to thinking, when you go to a store and you purchase anything, you're making a transaction. When you give the money to the cashier, what does she always give you in return? A receipt. What is a receipt? It's a proof of purchase. What's on the receipt? The price you paid. So Peter and John, when they ran to the tomb and saw the linen cloth lying there, what did they see? They saw the receipt.
Wow.
They saw the proof of purchase. And when they opened it up, now whether there was an image there at that time or not makes no difference. There certainly would have been a pattern of bloodstains. They would have seen the price that was paid. And so they would have seen evidence of the crown of thorns, a scourging all over the body, wound in the side, nails in the wrist and the feet, bruises on the face, abrasions on the shoulders. They would have seen all that. So in my opinion, not only is the shroud a receipt, it's an itemized receipt documenting everything that was paid to purchase our salvation.
I want to talk about, when you said itemized receipt, and we've got the picture showing here. Let's go through the forensics. I hadn't planned to do that.
Okay.
But this is Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm going to run this Christmas week along with the interviews that we did with the Right Honorable Barry Schwartz and Dan Marzulli. I think you guys will. It's a great Christmas present because he was born to die for us.
Yes.
And, Merry Christmas, but let's focus on why. Let's go through the forensics. Let's work from the crown of thorns, which is more like a helmet, on down. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, let's set it up this way. People would say, well, how do you know it's Jesus? It could be the shroud of anybody,
right?
Because thousands of people were crucified, and certainly the crown of thorns was a singular mockery for the man who claimed to be king of the Jews. Not everyone received the crown of thorns as a routine of crucifixion. It was a mockery. And so here you have at least 30 different puncture wounds all around the head with blood, spurting out in various, angles. Clearly this man was given some kind of, probably a cap of thorns. Not a nice, neat little wreathlet, but literally just a bulky clump of thorns jammed on his head. And then the scripture says, and they did this, and then they put a staff in his hand and took the staff out and started beating him in the head with this staff. So it would have driven these thorns deep into his scalp, which is astonishingly painful. And then you go down from there, and you look at the blood on the arms, and you're down here. What would have been from this position in the crucified stance, blood would have come down the arms, puddled under the elbow, and dropped down to the ground, which is what we see.
Wow.
And then we see the arms over the pelvis like this, and then we have the nails in the wrist. The arms would have been like this because we see them like this. So we see the exit wound here, but if you turn it around, it would have been here in the wrist. Medical research done shows that a nail through the palm of the hand will not hold the weight of a crucified man. It would eventually work itself through the fleshy part in between the fingers. So it had to be in the wrist. Now, this is an interesting thing, is that when a nail penetrates the wrist, it cuts tendons and nerves and causes the thumbs to jerk into the center of the palm. And it's no doubt excruciating, but at either point on the shroud image where thumbs could be visible, there are no thumbs visible. And then then we have a wound in the side right here, and it's and we see blood flowing down from it. Now you're probably not really clear in this picture here, but if we did a close up on it, you're not gonna. I don't have the slide.
Okay, all right.
If we did a close up on that side wound, you'd see the clear separation of blood and blood serum, indicating that this is post-mortem blood flow, blood that flowed after death. And that's exactly what happened to Jesus.
So if I was a forger, I would have to know forensics. And, of course,
yeah,
in the 15th century, they don't have this type of forensic knowledge at all.
Right. Well, just in terms of the wounding patterns are consistent
with a
real human being who died from these wounds.
Right.
The blood is AB blood type, human male DNA, found out in 1995. And that's not a guarantee. But we pulled it from a blood particle, so it's probably accurate that, so it's human male DNA. It was too degraded to get into a lot of ethnicity and things like that. But it's clearly blood from actual wounds. And so but this side wound is intriguing because this is the only wound that occurred after death. And that's what we see. We see post-mortem blood flow. We see the separation of blood and blood serum and the separation happens when the blood is no longer circulating.
Right.
And so this would be consistent with the biblical account. Remember, both of the thieves on either side of Jesus were still alive. They would come by in the late afternoon with a large wooden mallet weighing about 15 pounds, shatter the bones under the knees, can't stand on broken legs, die from asphyxia, which is the inability to breathe, as well as hypovolemic shock. Then they said, so then they take the bodies down and almost always throw them into a common grave. But when they came to Jesus, they noticed that he was already dead. Therefore, they did not break his legs.
Amazing.
But then it says, see, Joseph of Arimathea, who purchased the linen shroud and owned the tomb which Jesus would be laid to rest in, he's gone to Pontius Pilate to request the body of Jesus to be handed over to him. So before they could hand the body over to him, they had to make sure he was dead. Hence, they stabbed him in the side. Out flowed blood and water, according to John. Maybe water, but maybe just blood and blood serum.
Which is what it looks like water, right?
Exactly, it looks like water. And so everything seems to be consistent with this being the burial shroud of Jesus. And there's one more thing. The Shroud of Turin is a very expensive cloth. It's made out of flax, which most linens were, but it is a 3-to-1 herringbone pattern weave. It's very complex. Yeah, you can see it there. It is a very complex weave. It's doable in first century using first century loom technology, but it's expensive. What does the scripture say? Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, purchased a fine linen cloth.
And here it is.
In fact, it qualifies as fine twisted linen.
Wow.
Now, is there any chance that someone who died a criminal's death would be wrapped in a rich man's shroud? It's never going to happen. And so in fact, it is a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. In Isaiah 53, it says, he will make his grave with the wicked and the rich in his death.
Amazing.
How do you do that? Crucified, criminal's death, in between two thieves, yet placed in a rich man's tomb and wrapped in a rich man's shroud.
Amazing.
And so it's a fulfillment of prophecy. And so I don't have any problem believing that this is the burial shroud of Jesus. But you know what? At the same time, it remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. I can't prove definitively that this is the burial shroud of Jesus. I don't have the DNA of Jesus to match it up.
Right.
And so, but having said that, I mean, it's like, who else is it going to be?
Well, let me a couple of things here. We know that the Sudarium of Oviedo, which allegedly was the cloth that wrapped Jesus's face, or someone's face, let's put it that way.
Right.
That came into Oviedo, I believe, in the 7th century.
Yes, early 7th.
So it remained there, and just recently, in modernity, they were able to take the cloth and overlay it over the face of the shroud, and they found, I think, 40 points of congruency. Speak to that.
Lots of points of congruence on the same matching blood type.
Right. Also
matching pollens from the Sudarium as well as the shroud, both from in and around Jerusalem. This cloth, it would have been a Jewish custom, a custom probably in all cultures, but it was certainly a Jewish custom to cover the face of the dead. So here you can imagine Jesus hanging on the cross. He's been through this horrific ordeal. I mean, he's got blood everywhere. And no doubt one of the women went up to the centurion and said, "May we cover his face?" And he probably said, "Yeah, go ahead and be quick about it." And so they put a little step stool up to the cross. Take this. It's about the size of a small bath towel, about 20 by 30 inches. Recover his face and pin it in the back, and this remains on his face until they get him to the side of the tomb. Okay. Now they would have taken the linen shroud and laid it out, placed the body onto the linen cloth, removed the Sudarium, roll it up, place it next to the body. Anything with blood on it has to remain with the body. Right. And then they would have wrapped the cloth over him lengthwise. And so this would have been consistent with a man who died by violent death, of no washing of the body, you just with a significant loss of blood, you just cover the body in a full linen cloth. And it's so this Sudarium is also known as the napkin. It can be correlated with the shroud, and it's in Oviedo, Spain. Hence the.
Have you ever seen it?
I have not seen it, but I've seen lots of pictures of it. Right. I have not seen it. So now it's interesting, which brings me to another point, which is let's talk about mystery for a minute. The shroud remains an unsolved mystery, and that seems preposterous on its face. Anyways, in the 21st century, are you kidding me? We can't figure out whether something's a work of an artist or not. And so, but you think about all of the deep things of God are all mysteries. Mm-hmm. I mean, can anyone in your audience explain how Jesus fed 5,000 people with a boy's lunch?
Exactly.
I mean, can you explain to me how he raised Lazarus after 3 days dead, or calms a storm with a simple command?
Right.
I mean, the church calls them miracles, but they're mysteries.
Yeah.
Now, what if we just discovered today in Jerusalem somewhere the burial shroud of Jesus? The very cloth that covered his body at the point of resurrection, where time and eternity met, it would probably be a mystery. Mm. And that's exactly what we see with the shroud. Why is it that we can't figure it out? And then back to the Sudarium, there is a principle laid out in Deuteronomy 19:15 that says that the truth of a matter must be established with the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now think about this. Every miracle Jesus performed had eyewitnesses. Everything. But the one miracle that establishes him as, in fact, the Son of God, the resurrection from the dead, that miracle had no eyewitnesses. You would think that would be in complete violation of God's word. Now, there's a good reason for that, because there was a big stone put in front of the entrance, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the question then is not who are the witnesses. The question is, what are the witnesses? Mm-hmm. there has to be 3 witnesses. Well, 2, absolutely 2. 3 preferably. First witness, empty tomb. Everyone goes to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage or a visit, a tour. You know, where are they going to go?
Tomb, sure.
They're going to go to the Garden Tomb, or they're going to go to the Tomb of the Holy Sepulchre. You know, one or the other. We have competing tombs, and so the first piece of evidence, which is why all the apostles stayed in Jerusalem, because that's where the empty tomb was. All through first century, that's all they preached was the resurrection, and they could point to the empty tomb as proof. But one's not enough. So what are the other 2 witnesses? The second witness has to be the linen cloth lying there. That was the first piece of evidence that caused John to believe that indeed something extraordinary had occurred, right? Mm-hmm. But there has to be another witness, and that's the napkin, or the Sudarium of Oviedo. Right. Now, the reason that this is intriguing is because human witnesses would all be dead. But these witnesses testify even today. The empty tomb, the Shroud of Turijn, and the Sudarium of Oviedo, all 3 testify to the life, suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus, even to this day.
I've never heard it put quite that way. That's astounding. Let me ask, circling back to the forensics.
Yeah.
And this, I remember when we look at the scourging with a Roman flagrum, 3 pieces of leather with some metal, glass, whatever, and the torturer would fling it, it would embed, and then tear the skin out. So we see that the scourging is incredibly brutal.
Yeah, there's more. I mean, it's clearer on the back, but I don't have a back image on here except for
unbelievable.
It's.
But from a forensic point, if you're an artist, you wouldn't know that if you scourged right above the heart, which they did not scourge, you'd kill the man. And so the torturers knew that, and he's not scourged right above the heart. Speak to that. Right.
Well, there's about 120 scourge marks or more on the shroud. It kind of depends on how you count them, and it's but clearly he was brutalized, and it's consistent with what we would see in a Roman flagrum.
Unbelievable.
They're usually tipped, those leather thongs that come out, they're typically either bits of bone or metal, usually sheep knuckles, and it's and so now that begs another question, which I didn't get into in identification of the body. Thank you, you reminded me of this. Is why did Pontius Pilate? Why did he have Jesus scourged so badly? Because the anomaly here is that we have a man who was clearly crucified, but he's brutally scourged. Usually, someone who would be crucified, would be scourged and released as a form of punishment. Because that's what happened to Paul at least 5 times. And then, or he would be crucified. Now, the Romans expected you to stay alive all day long. So they're generally not going to scourge you to the point of death before hanging you on the cross, okay? Because they want you to remain alive and become this kind of public spectacle. And it's so the question is, why was Jesus scourged so badly? Because Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, did not believe that Jesus was guilty of a crime worthy of capital punishment. He didn't want to kill him. And the first thing he did, he sent him to King Herod. Herod sent him back. Then he tried to trade Barabbas, and that didn't work. And so finally he had him scourged to within an inch of his life, thinking that when this bloodied hulk of a man came walking back into the courtyard, that maybe they'd say, okay, that's enough. You don't have to kill him. That's not what happened. Yeah, exactly. So in spite of being brutally scourged, they still wanted him dead.
His blood be upon us and upon our children.
Yes. What a horrible curse. Yeah, and it's and then Pilate, at least in the Gospel of Matthew, has him bring out a bin of water. I wash my hands of this whole affair. This is on you. Wow. He did not want to kill him. And what was his wife's name? Claudia, I think. I think Pilate's wife had a bad dream. Bad dream. It says, I'm being tormented by this Nazarene, have nothing to do with him. And of course that probably spooked Pontius Pilate too. So but that's interesting, because now you have a man who's clearly crucified, clearly died a criminal's death, and yet also brutally scourged. So what are the odds? You start
very atypical.
Yeah, very, very atypical, so anatomically speaking, you know, it would seem that if you're trying to identify the man, you know, other than DNA, I think forensically you'd have to say it's Jesus.
Yeah, and I concur. Russ, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real treat for me. What are your closing thoughts here before we let you go?
My closing thought is this. The shroud represents it conforms with the gospel, past, present, and future. And millions of people say, why do I have to believe that Jesus rose again from the dead in some supernatural resurrection? Why can't I just believe that he was a good man who did good things? Mm-hmm. And I submit you can believe whatever you want, but if that's all you believe, it's not enough. Now, why do I say it's not enough? Because if Jesus is not risen, he's dead. And a dead Jesus could offer us nothing. Only a Jesus who has risen from the dead, who has defeated the power of death, only that Jesus has the right, the ability, and the authority to offer us anything beyond this life. That's point number one. Point number two, past, present, and future. I've already talked the present. In the present, we see on the cloth the price that was paid. That's the receipt. The receipt. So, but also speaks to a future event. And in 1 Corinthians 15, it says, you know, listen, I show you a mystery. Right. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, in a flash. Just like that. There it is. And this is a future event. It hasn't happened yet, right. But I think this is a snapshot.
That's a prototype.
This is a picture. This
prototype of the rapture.
This is a preview of coming attractions.
Well said.
So that's what I think it means prophetically.
Folks, thanks so much for watching Politics, Prophecy, and a Supernatural Report. Russ, thanks so much for coming on the record. Really appreciate it. Merry Christmas, everyone. Remember, we celebrate his birth, but everything points to his death and resurrection, and that's why we're set free. Remember, we'll see you on the air or in the air.